Blessings and welcome back, everyone. I'm astrologer Elsa Wadsworth, and I am here today with friend and fellow astrologer and colleague Christopher Scott. Welcome, Christopher.
Hey, Elsa.
So you might recognize Christopher from our Firmicus Maternus book club that we've been kind of like repping through the new year. So Christopher and I and Matt from the Astrologer's Encyclopedia uh, host a Monday night book club, Mathesis on Mondays, Maternus Mondays, once a month. And Christopher and I were going to sit down. Well, we did sit down actually in Libra season to record. We were going to record like a little intro to who Christopher is before we started the book club. So you guys could kind of be, acquainted with Christopher as we brought him in for the Maternus book club. But that recording got all wonky. Not only did it record wonky, but then I lost it through a computer crash. So, anyways, we are finally here today. So thank you, Christopher, for being here.
I
Yeah,
blame the eclipse season.
it was eclipsy. We weren't like it definitely was. And then there was the holidays, and then there was just a lot. So here we are, and we are here on a Wednesday. I don't know when this will get out to you guys, but we are recording on a Wednesday evening, which I think is really sweet. I was like, oh, it's sweet that it worked out that way because both Christopher and I have Mercury and Virgo. So I was like, oh, that'll be kind of cute on a
Indeed,
Wednesday.
we do. And
Indeed, we do. So, and you probably will, the more you know us, the more you'll be like, duh, that's obvious. So let's go ahead and get started. I just basically want to, we don't have an outline we're working off of. Christopher and I know each other well. We have two study groups per week that we engage in that are private study groups, as well as the Maternus group. And we've worked together on a few projects before as well. So we just work together a lot in the background. So we're just kind of like winging it tonight just to bring you guys like a little, um, I guess you could say bio, a little introduction on Christopher Scott so that you guys feel like you know him a little bit better as he frequents on the channel. You would have seen him on the live and on the Firmicus Maternus stuff. So I guess I'll just ask you a few questions and get the ball rolling. Does that sound good?
that sounds great.
Okay, so Christopher and I, why don't you we met at
We
Norwalk.
met at Norwalk, and I can. This is
Take it
actually funny.
away.
It's
Yeah,
a
take it
funny
away.
story. So we're sitting here in a class. I think Austin Coffey was giving a class on decennials, and in my decennial period, we were talking about the Mercury thing. My decennial period actually coincides with a time where I had a near life moment and decided I was going to go back to school and learn to read Greek and Latin. And so I went back to school in a classics grade. I was explaining this to Austin Coppock, and this pair of hands reached out and grabbed my arm and said, "Oh my God, you can read Greek!" And that was how I met Elsa.
No, I was like, I apologize to Austin. I was like, I am so sorry, Austin, for eavesdropping. And I was like, I am so sorry to you for like interrupting your thing. I was like next, in line to like speak with Austin, but it was just the two of them there. And I kind of like came up and like overheard, and it was totally rude. And I was just like, I was so sorry for interrupting. Please get a hold of me when you're like finished here or
Yeah.
whatever. And then, he spoke to Austin, then, I spoke, like just, I think it was a question or just like a little something. And then I saw Christopher out in the lounge, and I just basically was like, I'm your new friend. Here we are. We're talking about stuff. And I was working on a project that I still have going in the background. And it's, oh my God, it's been 3 years that I've been trying to get this project to you guys. I hope there's a day when it's public. I hope to God, because what I've been working on in the background is like totally amazing. And I think all the viewers would love it. So many people would love it. Christopher's helped me with this project. But it's just in some final stages. And I had like an artist working on the project who couldn't and then bailed and like whatever. So if you are like a digital artist, a graphic artist, or anything like that, and want to work on an Astro project, please hit me up. But anyway, the point is right away I was like, oh my gosh, Greek, like I could totally pick your brain about a bunch of stuff. And I had been doing a magical working to try to get help on this project because I needed some to check my Greek and to check my Greek lettering before I make the project possible. And I had actually talked to Demetra earlier in the Norwalk before I had met Christopher, and I was like saying to her, like, what do I use? She goes, oh, use Perseus. And I'm like, oh God, like I've tried. And it's just kind of daunting when you don't have enough of a background to fact check yourself to make sure that you have everything correct. So I was so pumped to meet Chris. And then we're both kind of banterers and we're both talkers. And you were leaving the day that I met you, but I just remember it being so fun, like in the lounge, kind of like razzing you and your friend up with Norwalk energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it was kind of interesting that same weekend. I had also done a magical talisman with over Venus and saying, "Hey, friends and allies," and then that also
So,
corresponded with the loosing of the bonds.
oh, I'm so sorry for interrupting. Oh my God. The loosening of the bonds in your chart. I was also at the Christopher Warnock Venus talisman workshop. So you and I had both. Is that what you're talking about? The
Yeah,
Warnock?
yeah, yeah. We did and I was one of the handful of people. He said, "Who has an afflicted Venus?" And I have an afflicted Venus, and so I was one of the people sitting. He was like, and he looked at like the four of us and said, you guys have courage. You guys are brave."
I was like, and so anyways, that was beautiful. That was a beautiful moment. Shout out to Christopher Warnock. Like, I doubt he watches like all my videos or whatever, but shout out to him. We just put out an interview with him and he did this really cool like live Venus consecration because the election was like good enough to do it at that
Yep.
moment. And we colored these cool Venus paper talismans and he like guided us through a group ritual, which is so cool. And both of us were in that too, which was
Yep.
and you like you said, you're in a loosening of the bonds period in ZR. Do you know what level was that?
I think it was level 3.
That's cool. That's really cool. So by day,
Yeah, by day.
for those of you guys kind of who don't know the levels, it's like one is kind of like by hours or days, one is kind of like by days or weeks, one is like by weeks, more like
By
months,
months,
maybe
and then
years. Yep.
years.
And then you've got your years, and then you've got your sort of like longer overarching like decades or whatever it is, whatever it wouldn't have to be a decade, but your longest zodiacal releasing periods by years. So, okay, so then we met, we did these projects together. We had kind of been talking and then we got even closer. Like we'd been emailing back and forth a little bit and you were helping me with the project. Um and then we got even closer with a group, a private-ish group that you hold.
Yeah, yeah. A study group that I host, and a mutual friend of ours said, "Hey, there's this guy doing this reading group, and he sometimes looks at the Greek." And we didn't know, we didn't know. I didn't know at the time that the mutual friend was actually somebody that I knew, right? And so then y'all joined, and then I joined some. I joined one of your study groups, and we've been kind of for the last year or so. We've been working weekly, almost daily, all every other day. There's some sort of astrological exchange that comes on, and we work through stuff. And we've been, in my own background for the astrology, so we'll get to that. Is that I started studying, like astrology, like taking. I had a point where I was like, I'm going to really learn this astrology thing. I'd been a ceremonial magician for a number of years, and this is like 20 years ago, 24 years ago. I was like, I'm going to start learning astrology. And I recall picking up my Llewellyn text that, the Llewellyn's book on his introductory book on astrology, and I worked through that. I had no idea what was going on. And no, I was like utterly confused. And then I had my near life moment, went back to school, and ended up taking one of the, it's almost 20 years now ago that Demetri George taught at the university I was going to with my classics program, and did a course on the history of astrology, and even talked about, introduced us to a simple technique, the Trigon Lord of the Sect Light, or the Triplicity Ruler of the Sect Light. Trigon Lord sounds so much cooler, but
I'm a
wait
Trigon
for it.
Lord fan.
Trigon Lord. I mean, it just sounds like something out of an old Doctor Who episode. I am
Yeah.
the Trigon Lord of the Sect Light, and and it was interesting because even that little reading where I looked at my chart and had my birth information quite. It's like that chart predicted things would improve at a certain age, And, fast forward to that age, things improved dramatically. Um, that led to me looking more into traditional astrology, which I found made much more sense than a lot of the modern stuff. The traditional seemed anchored to philosophies that I was intimate with and very familiar with, the ideas of Platonism and the philosophy of the Hermeticism, and so I became a student, and I call myself a traditional astrologer, and I have a skill set that is informed by Hellenistic astrology. I've read a lot of the Hellenistic astrology texts, and I also have tried to tackle some of them in Greek because I have some Greek. I can look at what's going on in the Greek if I get confused with the translation in English, and it's like, what are they really saying in the Greek? And look at that. I've also have a background in medieval and Renaissance astrology as well.
Yeah, totally. So a traditional astrologer, I know that both of us read some of the Arabic astrologers, the translations by Benjamin Dykes, but you're currently a part of his cohort, are you not?
Yeah, I'm in one of his cohorts. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so Ben Dykes, traditional astrology, and then of course we're going through the Maternus, which is in Latin, but both you and Matt have like some familiarity with Latin as well.
Yes.
So we've got that, we've got the language background. And then I think, what's really beautiful and like cool is we both have different backgrounds and kind of like magical backgrounds. But that also is like a perfect fit for our friendship and also like a fun part of like what we can offer here. And maybe we'll have some talks about like as we start to do talks in the future, because you have not just this language background, not this like you are kind of a walking encyclopedia when it comes to astrology and authorship in the traditional realm, but you also have that magical piece. That do you want to talk to us at all about
Yeah.
like that kind of first piece of your life, like pre going back to school for classics, like
Yeah. So, like, in a when I was first in college, it was like older than I care to admit, and but I got in. I like a lot of men of my period, so to speak, who were kind of interested in the esoteric. We would stumble onto, Aleister Crowley and the Golden Dawn materials, or Solace materials, and really get it, kind of groove with the ceremony of magic and maybe explore Goetia and Solomonic stuff. Get into studying Kabbalah. I bought my first tarot deck a long time ago.
me too.
Interestingly, a very
Me
long
too.
time. And so you studied tarot, studied the Kabbalah, studied ceremony magic. Initiated into the OTO at one point. I still maintain my membership, though I haven't done a lot with it. Was at one point a body master in Eugene, and you know, and really actively engaged. And I've also done quite a bit in the area of the Enochian magic of John Dee. Part of what also encouraged me or inspired me to get into traditional astrology that he too was an astrologer, and
Mm,
he was not a modern astrologer by any stretch of the imagination. His astrology is probably closer to William Lilly's, but it's still traditional astrology.
mhm,
And
mhm.
in fact, it's from his library. We do have one of the surviving manuscripts of Vedi's Valens.
Which is awesome.
So
Which
yeah,
is, yeah, yeah. So anyway, you have a background. We wanted to introduce Chris as well, just because um you will, of course, have more of like, you'll have your website and your channel, and I'm sure in the future, like make a presence as a practicing astrologer, which you are. But just as myself, like we're just kind of like practicing astrologers, word of mouth, here's my email kind of thing. But Christopher and I have these like long 4-hour conversations all the time, and we're in all of these study groups, and we have this for the Firmicus Maternus. And as you guys know, who you all came to the first live that we had the other day, we have been wanting to do more lives and stuff like that. And I just didn't want people to be like, who's this guy out of the blue? Like, no context or whatever. Because I know, like, for David, he has a channel. For Matt from Astrologers Encyclopedia has a channel. Like, and I'm like, oh, you've been introduced to these people as the channel was going. And I was like, let's just do a little introduction for Chris so that when we want to do cool videos on like magic and astrology and whatever, that you have, a little background on Chris being a friend of the channel.
yeah, yeah.
The live was fun the other night, wasn't it not?
Live was fun. I had imagined on the live because I think you introduced me when we were talking about the Schmidt lectures on the Eudoxus that were, and I had listened to them all, right before, and I was still like swimming in that psychedelic experience of the sort of etymological roller coaster ride that is Robert Schmidt and his material. Uh, and so I
You know,
remember,
that's why I brought you on because I knew you had just binged it and you were in the
yeah,
background. I
uh,
also know that now you had like to meet introduction with Katie. But when I met, I also like bullied Christopher into getting into the Schmidt stuff. I was like, no, because we both, like we said, like Mercury and Virgo, and like we will go off. Like sometimes our study group on Valence will last like 5, 6 hours and we'll go
yeah,
into the word and we're pushing back and forth and we're going
yeah.
wild.
It's spirited. It's as you'd expect. So the one of the readings for Mercury, right? So everyone says, "Oh, brainy, intellectual, wordy contest," right? The
The
wrestle.
lawyer argument.
The argument. And so and so we'll follow this principle of we'll get into we'll look at a sentence in Valens or look at a sentence in Firmicus Maternus, and we'll throw down and really wrestle it out to we're both clear. We may have to dust ourselves off after when we're done, kind of, get the towel and everything. But till we're really clear what that sentence says about that subject, and
Even the
and
word,
how to use it. Yeah.
even the
So
word where like, and I knew like if you're willing to like, Chris would be like, oh, let me pull out the Greek. I gotta look at the Greek and like settle some disputes in the Greek. Like it's all so loving. Like we love it. And we'll like, it's not like fighting, but it's like we're disputing the word where we need to look at the Greek. We look at what this author translates, what that author translates. And as we're doing this, I'm like, this guy needs to like know Schmidt. Now I know you had some of the translations, and so that's been helping us also is looking at his translations. But I was like, what we do here with like what I know Chris loves to do with this etymology and like with this like contest, this kind of like going deep into the work, I was like, you got to get on the Schmidt ride. And because that's kind of like Schmidt's vibe is to like go wild on a word for like a whole lecture or something like this. So I was like, check it out. So now we've been like listening to that and contesting that amongst each other too. Like we'll listen, we'll contest, we'll go up against the material, we'll go with each other into the material. And it's been amazing to have. And of course, David and I have been on this sort of like that same tip. David's very mercurial as
yeah,
well for many years. So it was like a nice addition. And this is what we like to do in the background is just go wild on this stuff, like, and be like, what is really happening here? Um, and diving deep into the material. So it was like a perfect fit. And knowing the Greek, I was like, oh my God, we can ask Christopher all this stuff. He's going to know exactly what Schmidt is talking about. We already used the Schmidt translations. So that's another one of our study groups is like going toe to toe with this. So I thought it would be kind of cool since David was on with Katie and she was announcing the Eudoxus thing and you were like, I binged it last night. I was like, okay, come on. Like, let's introduce you on the live. Come on in. Um, so yeah, those tapes I'm halfway through, but those are kind of still, it's
it's
a
it's
magnum opus.
it's a lot to pick apart. So I don't want to go too much into it. Though you definitely I think you definitely if you so I'm just to the audience, if you haven't gone in and made an effort to subscribe to the Project Hindsight or Robert Schmidt Astrology to listen to his lectures, it's worth doing it. If you're interested in Hellenistic astrology, it's interesting to take a look at, it's there are a lot of purveyors of Hellenistic astrology techniques who are out there now, building their career in this, and it's useful to have every resource at your disposal. It's my teacher of mine when used to say about Enochian magic is that if you're studying the Enochian magic of John Dee, you want to read everything that's available, even the schlocky stuff. And just because somewhere in there you're going to find the essence of what's being talked about. It's interesting to note that when you read these traditional sources and you read, so if you read a translation of Paul's Alexandrinus or read the Valence translations that are available, whether it's Riley or Robert Schmitz or that other person who I can't remember their name, but um, you know, and you read them carefully, you'll realize that even something as simple as perfections, which a lot of people just know, is like, oh, take the ascendant and move it to the next sign. You realize there's a lot of nuance that can be there and what you learn from it, but you only get exposure to that by comparing and contrasting what everybody's saying about it.
Yeah, and I think that's where we sort of like align. And I think that's why we could have some good talks on the channel. Like basically, I think the audience would enjoy us bringing some of that discourse forward. And so like yeah, meet Christopher. We're about to bring some like magical, like textual, like astrological discourse forward in the future in some content for you and some videos for you. We were thinking about presenting a viewer had asked me, maybe even last year, shout out to you, I can't remember your screen name, but you are a part of the channel because I see your comments. You had asked to do like a Thema Mundi video, right? And we were like, talking about, like we were doing a bunch of homework on the Thema Mundi. We pulled a bunch of history and a bunch of charts. And like, of course, we resourced everything that we could resource. We're thinking about doing Thema Mundi. And this has been like for a year. That's why I was like, let's do an introduction so that when we do go over the Thema Mundi, what are some of the other ones that we've wanted to bring forward? Thema Mundi, I know, is like our first one that we were going to
Yeah, and it's
bring.
actually it's funny. I'll say this. I just realized like we got a lot more we can add to that Theo Monday talk.
Well, because of this,
Because of
Eudoxus, like,
this, because of the Eudoxus thing, it's like there's something about that that cracks open something that's worth like you have to like pry the rocks apart and go
big
in there.
time. It's almost like the universe was like, you don't have enough, you don't have enough,
You
just
don't have
wait
enough.
for the
Yeah,
Thema Mundi thing.
just
Yeah.
wait for the bomb to drop. We one of the pieces I have an interest in is working with triplicity rulership, and I'm always left with an interesting question. The question is, if you read Dorotheus, if you read Vedes Valens, there's a way in which they talk about triplicity rulership, and there's a way that they refer to it, um, and because of how they describe it and how they talk about it, I find it interesting to note that almost everybody who's engaged in the conversation and the practice of Hellenistic astrology, um, kind of uses it for one or two things and then kind of ignores it for everything else.
Mostly it's used as far as like, this is just, sorry to interrupt, but this is just like in my mind what I think. And it could be wrong, but to me, the only time that people really take triplicity into account is just with the triplicity lords of the second, the trigon lords of the
The
second.
Trigon Lord
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the Sectlight.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
that's like when we see it in common practice. And other than that, it's just like maybe you get a little salt and pepper around with the triplicity lords, but you don't hear a lot about them. And since
yeah.
we've been talking, like it's kind of a hobby horse of yours, the triplicities and how they're used.
There's a thing to say in it, and I'm not going to say like, hey, you can build your entire career off of being a master triplicity lord, but
But
I
yeah,
think 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 you could do quite a bit, and you could actually, if you're thinking about doing, if you're in a situation where you have to do like a bunch of quick readings, one after the other, and you're just looking, you have like 5 minutes to look at a chart and maybe 15 minutes to talk about what's going on to it. Understanding that technique give you how you'd be able to offer somebody something useful in a reading of their chart in kind of that Hellenistic traditional way. Like, here's some useful predictions. Here's some things to pay attention to in your life, and
so
send them on their way with something useful.
and
And
something, not just something useful, like you could tell them about their next eclipse or something, which is useful. It's useful for a lifetime. It's
yeah,
like an overarch, like long thing that they can take with them, useful for a lifetime that's gonna like speak to them.
yeah,
So I agree. I thought about you when I was doing my live booth because I was doing 15-minute like overviews, like an introduction to your astrological chart, basically, which I'd never done. And I was kind of like, oh, this is a little like wild for me, but it went swimmingly. Everyone had a great time. And I learned that like even within the traditional methods, you can do something of value in that setting. And it made me think of, we talk about this so often about like what it could have been like back in the day for like a street reader, for a little like, and I thought about this, like, you'll always give the example, and I'm butchering your story or whatever, about how you like you flick them a coin and they read your triplicities quick or something like this. It's almost like, and I thought about that when I was doing those little 15 minutes. I was like, you know, triplicities would be great to read with these people.
Yeah. Well, and like in my case, a quick lesson from a class that was on the academic history of astrology, where we were learned the Trigon Lord of the Sect Light as a term at the time, but triplicity ruler. And in fact, the year that my rulership handed over from a planet that was succeedant to a planet that was angular, that year, I dropped everything, spent several months on a pilgrimage, and then when I came back, like my entire life went from succeedant to quite crematisticos, and it was amazing. It's like wow, it sold me on that. It's like oh wow. Now I had a few other things that also had a handing over that was like that at the same time, so probably mine was amped up a little bit, but still, it's a technique that's worth really looking at. It's kind of cool. So
Yeah, it's hard for me. Like both of my triplicity lords are angular, so I didn't notice like as much of a shift, but I'm sure for a lot of people it's really descriptive. And I remember like us having so many conversations going through Valens as well as like a lot of times he might not only be referring to domicile lords in the way that we think about them.
right.
And this goes for exaltation, and this also goes for triplicity, where it seems in our minds that you would commonly just go like, oh, Venus Taurus or whatever, like just that classic domicile. But, we'd have deep conversations, and you were sort of advocating also in Valence for us to just imagine or think about that he didn't actually say that, and that in a lot of places it's implied that it could be also exaltation and also triplicity. And when we
Yeah.
were reading the Methesis, Firmicus Maternus Methesis, he actually has a small, just like little blip, like a little sentence at the end of like one of his paragraphs where he's like, and just so you know, I think he said the Egyptians, you can correct me if it was the Babylonians, but I think he said the Egyptians. He was like, and the Egyptians used to not use these domicile lords at all. In fact, the Egyptians said that the exaltations were the natural home
That
of
was
the
the
planet.
Babylonians, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Was
Sense.
it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I get it confused, and I'm sorry. I'm very
this
sorry.
happens to me all the time. So
So yeah, so the Babylonians, he was saying basically the ancients, right, would have not looked at the houses, that domiciles of the planets, the way that we look at them now. He said, in fact, they consider the exaltations to be the actual homes, the natural homes. I forget how he put that. I should have like pulled it up. I didn't know we were going to talk about it, but
yeah,
it kind of was like a penny in the jar of our conversations, like, earlier in the year with talking about Valens and these ancient authors and how it's there's a bigger schema, and they probably gave more weight to some of these bigger lords like triplicity lords, exaltation lords, things like that.
yeah. I mean, and there's nuance too to go into it. You know, we it. I point out, and I've pointed out is there's an ambiguity in the language that Valens uses or that Dorotheus uses to kind of allow you to read other kinds of rulers when they're speaking about these things. And so that's something we'll have a more in-depth conversation about that soon.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm maybe teasing. I'm just kind of like getting people, since we didn't have like an outline, I'm like, what are some of the things we want to bring forward? The things that we can have deeper conversations about. And like they're, easy enough to bring to the public. They're not like still in the, you
Right, it's
know.
not like buried into layers of esoteric. Like, well, once you get to here, then you'll see for sure that Mercury at this degree is really awesome. And it's like, okay,
Yeah. So the Thema Mundi, which is a huge, huge episode, like, it's a huge undertaking. So we've got that coming up, some some trigon conversations potentially. Thought we had more on the list, but there's a
we
million to
talked
think.
about magic. One of the more powerful magical experiences I had as a ceremony magician was shortly after when Chris Warnock published his Thabit Ibn Qura book, Astral High Magic. Uh, I actually used one of those techniques. It was a really elaborate technique. My astrology experience at the time was a few years of working with William Lilly's style of horary astrology, and I was getting my feet wet with electional, and it was it was an experience. And it, but in terms of the magic, in terms of the astrology, it was sophisticated astrology that informed the magic and then made the magic itself effortless. And so there's something to talk about in terms of what people can do with astrological magic to go beyond just simply, wear the Jupiter colors on Jupiter day and the Jupiter hour, or even thinking about some of the more interesting and sophisticated ways you can do elections, like work with a root chart. What is it like to work with a root chart? There's different ways we can do elections where we're going to emphasize the planetary energy, or we're going to emphasize a house situation, or we're going to emphasize something. But also, what is it to work with a root chart? And it was my first experience actually doing that, like working with a root chart, and it was phenomenal and mind expanding. And there's a piece of it is that when you get into some of these technical, particularly technical traditional astrology, where there's this implication by the worldview, not to shout out to Chris Warnock, but by the worldview, there's an implication that you're going to affect the world by looking at or adjusting the configuration and the election and whatnot. And to see that play out, um, it forces you to drop the illusion of something else and embrace a new version of reality.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, also you, another shout out to Warnock. I mean, his uh interview just dropped, his second interview just dropped anyway, but I think we would have came upon this naturally even without that interview just dropping. It just so happens that that was the last one. But you also are enrolled in his course and have been plugging away at it over time as well. And like I
Yeah,
know both of us like I mean, you're doing a lot, you're always doing a lot in
we're
the
we're
background.
we're we're where we're at with these courses.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So but that's another thing. Like both of us do like talismanic work, both of us do like ritual work. Like I have a room in my house for it's a temple in my apartment. I shouldn't say house. I have a tiny apartment, but I set aside like a large part of my apartment for like magical workings, temple stuff, and we both are we both share our you know goddess worship as like a priority in our
Yeah.
workings as kind of like a foundational piece. And so of course we've not just the Thabit Ibn Qura, but like, the Picatrix and all these other things that you do when you're an astrologer and a magician and a I was gonna say like a celestial something like I don't want to
Well,
take
yeah,
Warnock's.
I'm gonna say I'm not a celestial priest
No,
like Warnock.
Warnock can have it.
I
Warnock can have
I'm
that.
I'm a devotee of I'm a goddess worshiper. That's correct. I have some ordination affiliated with a Gnostic group and a few other things. Um, and I don't, it's like, but it's not one of those like I sit there and it's like, oh well, I'm this. It's rather I'm just saying I have a daily practice or a practice that is a devotional practice. A lot of bhakti yoga in that area. I've like a lot of people that we know. I've experimented and played with quite a few things. I also have an active Buddhist practice in the Theravada tradition, associated with the local monastery and hermitage. And and then all those kind of flow together seamlessly to kind of create a sort of cocktail of things that when engaged in these conversations and talking about whether it's an astrological technique or looking at certain ideas of magic or looking at certain ideas of metaphysical or philosophy, um, it makes for interesting conversation. We've had brilliantly fascinating conversations, within our groups, within each other, and so it's been absolutely delightful. And so I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be here to share whatever I can share and hopefully make a difference and support what's going on with the channel.
Yeah, and make a difference in y'all's life. Like I brought this forward as a community channel, and like there's been so many nights where Christopher and I are just like in this, just like I'm like, wow, this should have been recorded. Like this would have helped people, this would have been interesting. Like, so I'm like, we have to like make space for that. Now, it doesn't always come out when you say, when you turn on the camera and say go, but we're going to try to bring a little
Right.
of this like nectar to you. Usually it comes after like 4 hours of like whirling, and I'm like, damn, we should have pressed record on that podcast because that would have been a good moment to capture. But it's like, okay, we'll bring what we can forward. And I like you feel like a devotee. I feel like a devotee not just of the goddess, but of the tradition of astrology. I feel like a humble student, and we're bringing some of our community, and our friends and our sort of like little corner of the astro world like forward as like a seva, as like a little bit of an offering to give back, like a little bit of also wanting to community build and like share our practice with you all, share our readings with you all. So yeah, thank you, channel, for being here. Thank you for everyone who finds any value in the content. It's really sweet. And even with my background in yoga, like, and I think Christopher and I would also align in this, like there's a certain part of it, and I think it comes from like that bhakti, like you were saying, it just like flows out from your heart. And it's like, I had a friend of mine be like, because I'm private and like unseen all the time, and she's like, "You're robbing the world. Like, it's not cool of you." Like, she's, like more of a modern kind of like, manifestation, but she's like an amazing friend. Shout out to Allison. And she's like, "Girl, you gotta get like." You think you're just being private and you can just like keep all this stuff and like do all this stuff in your house and like just love it and benefit from it in your own life and just the few who you're reaching. She's like, absolutely not. You have to shine your light as big and as open and as free as you possibly can. Like, share with as many people as you can. You don't know if like one little thing that you say is going to like touch someone or like help someone or like, so in that vein and in that motivation of like, giving and receiving is like the vibe behind the channel,
Yep.
and something I'd like to, invite you into, Chris. So I'm happy you're here.
Yeah, so it's like the is it the Magician Fool podcast? They always end like may the work we do here, in honor of, and perhaps for us, we should just be in honor of Hermes Trismegistus and our astral forebears, right? Shout out to Eudoxus, maybe, Robert Schmidt, to Dimitri George, to even Chris Brennan, and to the people who have paved the way for us to walk behind them, but also so we can take something, work
Achuta
on it,
Baba,
build on it,
Christopher Warnock,
add it right,
like, yeah.
add to it, and then inspire others to do the same. So that in our efforts we can spread a little bit of enlightenment and love.
Yeah, and love and just sharing this study. Like, and I agree, I love the magician and the fool. And they say, like, may the merits generated by this practice be given back, essentially. And they always
Yep.
donate their podcast, or I guess attribute their podcast to Hermes Trismegistus and Asclepius. And I
Yep.
love that. And I like wanted to steal that from them. I wanted to do like a, their opening. If you guys haven't listened to the Magician and the Fool, it's amazing podcast on YouTube. It's so good. We
Yeah.
love you. And the way they do their dedications in the beginning is like, both you and I have a Buddhist practice, and I a yoga practice as well, but we do that in the tradition. Like, you dedicate your practice before and after, and it's just, I love what they do over there. So I guess that's a part of what we're doing here, are honoring our lineage by bringing it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe also give a shout out to Elvedius Valens, and
that is.
you know, uh, so that he's properly acknowledged as bringing to us some of the techniques that have come to be defined as Hellenistic astrology, and um, you know, Dorotheus too. I mean, both of these guys, Thrasyllus. If we only had his surviving work,
you know
Thrasyllus. Anyway, waxing
and you
waxing
guys,
poetic and enthusiastic.
I have a friend who is more qualified to talk about Manilius than I, but like Manilius is next. And I'm telling everybody in the group that I'm like, you guys, we have to tackle Manilius. I cannot do this alone. And I know that he's like a divergent author, but he's one of the first authors. So it's like, I personally am trying to tackle it, but I need help. That again, like this goes to the channel and to our study groups. Like when I started a lot of these study groups and when I would prod and curate people out of the crowd and be like, come, it's like the student in me, like, yes, I want the community, but I like need other students and teach. Like, I need to push back against my teachers. I need to have other students that are willing to be like, it's this, no, it's that. Like, I don't know. It's keeping me up at night. Like, I personally, I can do it alone, but I don't want to. And you learn, like your growth is just exponential when you have people
Yeah,
reading it with you, telling how they understood what they said. And it also like keeps the focus. It's like when you're reading these texts by yourself, it's just like it's overwhelming essentially. And then it becomes fun and alive when you can sort of um, not only focus with someone else, but have like a little, I want to say like sandpaper to like rub the jewel smooth or whatever, like with your
right.
friends to like figure out what's going on here. Did you read it like I read it? Did you even understand this? Nope, no one understood it. Let's laugh. Haha, let's go over
Right.
it again?
Right. Or I think it says this. Well, I think it says this.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, defend your position. Okay, I'll defend my position. You defend your position, and we figure it out. Now let's see,
And
the
there's
whole
a
thing.
third. Usually it's not just two. Usually there's a third and a fourth.
There are a few ways, but the beauty of that is we do that, and then it builds a pretty tight community. We get that as Crowley said in one of his holy books, "As brothers fight ye," right? So let's get in and really kind of wrestle with these ideas and take something and polish it and hone it. And I can say to myself, since my friendship with you, my astrology has improved dramatically. My practical experience as an astrologer, what I can do with it when I look at a chart, you know, how quickly I can go from a piece of paper with a bunch of lines and squiggles on it to like understanding the dimensionality of a person's life has improved so much. And to be able to share a little bit of that when we do these conversations here on this channel, in the study groups we do, to be able to contribute something of that to somebody else who's just starting or somebody who's really seasoned and they're like looking for a fresh perspective. They want to break apart something and kind of look at it from a different perspective and see if they can learn something new. That's all available, and it is available when you have that ability to freely engage and say, "I think it says this." Somebody says, "No, no, 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 no. It says this instead," and go to town and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and thank you. And I agree. I ditto your sentiment, and that's what I feel like I get out of community. And back to like the channel versus like the private behind the scenes or the study groups, it's like I feel so grateful, so poured into. Like these you all, my friends are like colleagues and deep friends, and you don't just kind of like with yoga, like I used to have a curriculum. I wrote a curriculum and did yoga teacher trainings. And it's like people think they're going to come to be like a yoga teacher and like kind of get fit and it's like super fun and everything. And then everybody's like having a meltdown, like because they're doing all the postures and the yogic philosophy and they're challenging their body. And it's like the yoga's working on them, right? Like it's working. And then all of a sudden they thought, like, yay, fun yoga teacher training. And for you yogis, you know what I'm talking about. And so it's like you're facing all these things. We see this happening in our groups as well. We see this, we know this happens. It's happened in us. It happens to our friends. You have different plateaus where you're interfacing with like hard stuff, whether it's like someone's chart or your own like worldview or like whatever it is that the astrology is like gritty and it's polishing you as you're rubbing up against it and it's like you're having a time with it. And I feel like I'm so blessed. Like I have my ascendant Lord in the 11th. I have some super ninth house stuff. I have amazing friends and colleagues and that enrich my life so much, enrich my astrology so much, enrich my personal life, my heart, my mind. It's like, and to think of doing this journey alone, like the study of yoga alone or the study of astrology alone and just think of the richness I have versus that other thought that I could contrast that with, that and my friend telling me like, you are actually like grasping, you're being selfish. You need to share as much as you can, be as generous as you can. And I felt with all of that love that we have, all the friendships that we have, I don't think not everyone always has the community or the leadership skills to say, "Hey, I'm gonna start a study group," or you know what I mean? Like, not everybody who takes a course has that. You get it a little bit in a course, but more and more courses don't have the chat group, and they don't have the thing, and they don't have the Facebook group, and, like, maybe it's, like, less professional or, I mean, maybe it's, like, more of a, like, professional thing. It's not so, like, dug in, like, friendships, and, like, I know when I was studying astrology, we had so many spin-off groups, and it was so rich with like ability to connect that that's part of this offering as well as like imagine just being living in Indiana somewhere, picking up Chris Brennan's book, starting to study Hellenistic astrology, and it's all dry and you're all alone and like and I'm just like, oh my God, let's share some of this blessing and this juice that we actually are like highly privileged to be able to,
Yes.
have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you all for supporting that mission and being here and supporting the channel. And if that's you who can find their community here, you are more than welcome. We are so, so happy to have you. Um, and thank you for being here tonight, Christopher.
My pleasure. I wouldn't be anywhere else, so it's awesome to be here.
All right. Well, until next time, everyone, and Christopher will come with some more episodes and some more juice. But until then, y'all take care. Ciao.
Matahia mataoka ka bersamayo demikian soba da soba kenan matahiba nakawati ma demikian soba